Next, a good friend of mine, Dave Neilan, who we are working with on another project that we'll talk about tomorrow. But this is a topic that's been fascinating to me as a military spouse, learning about the Southern campaigns and these epistle wars of who outranks who. And it has been very, I need a flow chart, Dave. I'm going to need you to make one. But he does have one. But I would love to welcome to the stage my friend Dave Neilan, who's going to talk about conflicts in command.
Good evening. I think here it comes. Excuse me, guys, we're having a test. We have a little, need that quick. All right, so anyhow, my name is Dave Neilan. I've been here many moons and got dark. Okay, that's good. This is probably the maybe the third little subject about the conflicts in command that Francis Marion had through his 7 years in the Revolutionary War, and this one is probably the most obscure that anybody has ever even heard of, because you have to go through his Orley book and you can figure out what was really going on, but at the same time, to get a feel for it, you have to see a number of his letters that Francis wrote, and then other letters that a couple of these, excuse me, I had a stroke a few years ago, so some of these words I should not be using. This is why I'm heavy stumbling. Anyhow, one of the bad guys has written a few letters here also, so there's a whole bunch of different sources. There's something I think interesting, so you guys can judge yourself. Francis Marion, we're dealing now with in Charleston. This is 1779. That's where in November. Now, let me see if I can go through this. Probably not. There we go. Whoa. Okay, now we get back. This is, as I tell you about this little testing. All right, there we go. Francis Marion. It's very strange because we're talking here about titles and personalities that somehow don't really mesh that well, and so that's my little introduction to the main characters here. My background will give a little bit of that, because most of you, all the things I'm always saying, but just in case you don't, I'm going to give you a quick summary. This is the Revolutionary War of Francis Marion. It's mainly focused on his heroics after the fall of Charleston in May 1780. At the outset, however, Marion was not a guerrilla fighter through today's folklore. In fact, he was not the swamp fox then. He was, in reality, he was a professional soldier who worked up through the ranks. He was like any other real officer who just kind of grew up in the ranks. He was successful, he was proficient, but he wasn't brilliant. He was solid, he was dependable, just what the Continental Army needed then. His brilliancy and creativity would come later. Yes, he had here we go. Okay. He had recruited, organized, and trained the 2nd South Carolina Regiment. He had helped in building the fort on Sullivan's Island. He had led his regiment in convincing over the British fleet in June 1776 on Sullivan's Island. And in 4 years of independence, though he may have felt that he had just come, another in the cog the Army machine. Although not known as charismatic, he had come to be a reliable leader to whom unique challenges were entrusted. So at that point, he had earned the confidence of the military and political leaders in South Carolina. I went back again because I missed that again. Okay. In September 1776, Marion had been promoted to lieutenant colonel. When I'm getting the titles now, this is where you have to kind of think about, you have to remember this because they get very, very screwy. In 1778, Marion was promoted to a regimental commander with the unofficial title of lieutenant colonel commandant. So the problem here is that in May of 1778, the Continental Congress changed the title of commander of an infantry regiment. Marion had been promoted to lieutenant colonel commandant. That title did not exist because they were by this May 1780 Continental ruling, because the British commander had been a lieutenant colonel, but an American commander of a regiment was a colonel. So you have two ranks and they're different titles. And that became a confusion when you're trying to exchange prisoners. Because the British said it was a colonel, was a colonel, was a colonel, and the Americans say, no, wait a minute. Our regimental lieutenant colonel is really a colonel. But the British weren't going to buy off on it. So at that point in time, they made the lieutenant commandant a new title, unofficial, so that I guess suppose they could make if they need to make exchanges. So with that said, an American commander was promoted to lieutenant colonel commandant, but was still equal in rank to colonel. Now, do you all understand that? I thought so. So that's what I'm here to do today. I drove from Pennsylvania yesterday. I spent all day today just trying to get this information to you. The one key here, later on, because I really want you really have to think about these to get really, let's say, scroll. This whole change of title did not apply to artillery regiments. A colonel, and it did not change the colonel title in the artillery regiments. So now, just to, you can kind of get an idea with one thing. An artillery regimental commander was a colonel. A infantry regimental commander was a lieutenant colonel commandant. So, with that said, this is where things start to come through. All right, I'm going the wrong way. Here we go. All right, so with that said, now we go back. I had to give you all that background there. Real quick then. In 1778, the British took a foothold in the South, landing in Georgia. The British quickly took Savannah, marched to Charleston in spring 1779, and demanded surrender of the city. Then the British were rebuffed. They whipped the Americans at Stone Ferry, and the British then withdrew toward Savannah without going all the way. Then, in 1779, with the assistance of the French, the Allies laid the siege on the Georgia capital in Savannah. The siege lasted 16 days before the French Admiral D'Estaing recognized the futility of the attempt, and instead, with the hurricane season on the horizon, D'Estaing and American General Benjamin Lincoln planned a frontal attack on the British defenses. As probably many of you know about that one, on October 9, the American French forces were devastated. Lieutenant Colonel Commandant Marion led his 2nd Regiment in the face of blistering fire before the Spring Hill redoubt and the failed siege of Savannah. So, and here's our buddy Admiral Charles D'Estaing, who, by the way, had died, unfortunately, with a French killing machine. I think those are. I really don't recall the name of it, but somebody was lucky. Oh, that's what it was. A guillotine. That's what happened to him. Major General Benjamin Lincoln returned to Charleston, and he was, after heavy losses, they withdrew across the Savannah River into South Carolina, and the Army retraced its steps, and they're encamping at Charleston. That's 50 miles north of Savannah. Lincoln left at Sheldon, Francis Marion in command, and he also included Marion, of course, his 2nd Regiment, plus remnants of the 3rd and 5th Infantry Regiments, and then a 4th Artillery Regiment. Now, as mentioned about artillery, we've seen that commander of that artillery regiment would be Colonel Beekman, not Lieutenant Colonel Commandant. Just be with you. I'm making very evident that there's a difference in these guys, but there really isn't. At that time, the Patriot forces were in disarray, and now we now see a very curious situation, which is occurred in Sheldon. And this centered on the confusing understanding of command, or misunderstanding of command, in the American camp at Bull's Plantation at Sheldon. Now, Lincoln's going to Charlestown, and now the main players are all laid out. The main one is, and the first is Lieutenant Colonel Commandant Francis Marion. I always said and mentioned to you that he was promoted in September 1778. This is where 2 days really make a big difference. Colonel Bernard Beekman was commander of 4th South Carolina Artillery, and he had been promoted in June 1779. Marion had been promoted in September 1778. Equal ranks, different seniority. So with those players, the main characters, we have Benjamin Garden. He's a colonel in that, but he's in militia. So militia and Continentals, they keep those apart. They try to. Lincoln was the overall commander of the Southern Department of the Continental Army. And then our other player here, main players, was General William Moultrie, and he was in the Southern Department of the Continental Army. And he had been Marion commanding officer in Sullivan's Island, and the British fleet was repulsed in June 1778. That's our main players. Okay, now we need to, first thing to see where we're going to be. Mentioned Sheldon. Okay, map here shows, we'll see if I can actually get this thing working. Not me. Okay. Sheldon, you can see it's the middle slide here, which is pretty much halfway between Sheldon or Savannah on the bottom and Charlestown on the top. So now, that's weird. It started working. So you can see where it is, and it's a good place to be if you're being at Sheldon. Now what we have here, this is now that the Lincoln has left Sheldon, and he has left Lieutenant Colonel Commandant Marion in command. You can see them in the red there. I wish I could actually do this. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Lieutenant Colonel, you can see Marion directly under Lincoln, and you see under in this chart in red is Marion's 2nd Infantry Regiment. To the left is Colonel Beekman, 4th Artillery Regiment, and then that's weird. The remnants of 3rd and 5th Infantry, and you can see the solid line are direct reports, and dotted lines are, we'll call those temporary ones, in the sense that Marion was in charge by what Lincoln thought. This is what Lincoln thought was the structure that he had set up. Key here, he thought. And we also had then Governor Rutledge being commanding over Colonel Gardner, who has, because Rutledge stationed Gardner and his militia at Shelby, he's a dotted line to Marion. That's the structure that Lincoln thought he was going to create. So, at that point, Marion goes on further. Things really get weird then, because we know that Lincoln apparently gave Lieutenant Colonel Commandant Marion a brief furlough before taking command. So, in response to a request by Colonel Bernard Beekman of the 4th Artillery Regiment to return to Charleston, Lincoln wrote Beekman, Colonel Marion's permission to leave camp has put it out of my power to grant your request to come to town. So Beekman didn't get to leave. He was stuck in Shelby. So while Marion was in furlough, Governor John Rutledge had approved Lincoln's request to station Benjamin Gardner's militia at Shelby to aid the Continentals. And Lincoln wrote to Gardner on September 2, I must leave posting to them, and the officer, in this case would be Beekman in his absence, commanding at Shelby. So now we have Marion is gone, and we have Beekman. See everybody here, Rutledge, real quick. Marion arrives November 6th. He's presuming that he will resume command in the Continentals. Instead, Colonel Bernard Beekman, 4th Artillery Regiment, continued to command. So now we have a Lieutenant Colonel Commandant Marion returns to his camp and realizes that this Colonel Beekman is now commanding and is just ignoring Marion. And with Beekman there, we know that Marion was officially the commander at Shelby by his seniority. Remember, Marion was promoted in 1778. Beekman was promoted in 1779. So Marion is commander. There should be no doubt about it. But that's not the way it works. Now we have back at Shelby again. Wait a minute. That blue box, that was Marion, right?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, we have a new, but he's not. He actually turns out to be Beekman. So Marion returns on furlough, and apparently he's not in command of it. But you can also see the other organization here hasn't changed. So speculation surrounds the motivation for retaining command. This is basically one's this morning. Was he unaware of the regulation? I mean, it seems like he should know what he's doing. He's a governor, I mean, a colonel, he's not dumb. Was he not informed by Lincoln that Marion would be in command of the camp? Apparently not. Or they just ignore the regulation. I'm going to go with the third one myself. But regardless, Beekman continued to give brigade orders. However, General Lincoln's letter of November 11 to Marion, it's apparent that Lincoln considers Marion as commanding at Charleston. Now we're into back to this is what Lincoln thought. And Lincoln wrote, "You will be pleased to take the earliest opportunity to send to Charleston all entrenching tools and axes, saving from about 50, which you may send in camp, as also such stores in the quartermaster department, which will not be necessary for you." This particular letter was sent to Marion. Wait a minute. Beekman was in command, wasn't he? Basically, that this letter was sent to Marion. This is not in order to a second in command. This is an order for Lieutenant Colonel Francis Marion, commanding at Charleston. I don't think he looked like that. I mean, probably pretty braggy by that time. Okay, apparently Lincoln failed to inform Beekman, perhaps because the general rightfully expected that his 4th Regiment commander to know the chain of command. It's also possible that Beekman felt slighted by Lincoln's harsh words to him in a letter of November 1, in which the general wrote, "I suppose my orders were misunderstood, or that you had not seen them, for I had not an idea that you would have moved the troops contrary to my wishes, which much less against my instructions." I think maybe some of Lincoln's eyes are starting to open a little bit, finally. And just as an aside to that, I never really thought that Lincoln ever opened his eyes and saw anything active, so I'm not a real fan of this, obviously. The events that prompted Lincoln's letter are not known. However, there's no doubt that Lincoln was upset with Beekman. Even more significant is that written criticism of an officer by his commanding officer is highly unusual. Being criticized by a superior officer was not only ego-deflating, but was also would endanger the junior officer's potential for promotion. Whatever Beekman's rationale was, he further complicated the command at Charleston by apparently appointing Militia Colonel Garden, Militia Colonel, not Continental, commander of both militia and Continental troops, when he left for Charleston on November 13th. In addition, Beekman did not notify Marion he was even leaving and transferring to Charleston. In fact, there was no correspondence between those two guys. Marion never wrote anything to Beekman. Beekman never wrote anything to Marion. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? All right, so finally, we're getting, okay, Beekman's going. Okay, so we'll make it a little simpler now. Beekman's gone, but wait a minute. Colonel Garden, Granville, Militia. Wait a minute. He's commanding this guy, Marion, who's a lieutenant commandant of the Continental Army, and these other Continental Army regiments. Now, how in the heck can a militia colonel be the commander of the Continental Lieutenant Colonel Commandant? Obviously, Marion was upset. There is an implication here that Marion and Beekman had a fractured relationship, perhaps that might be going on. And only a junior officer who delegated command to a militia officer, Garden, over Marion, this wasn't a friend to him, obviously. But instead of complaining immediately to General Lincoln, however, Marion wrote to his former commander, Brigadier General William Moultrie. Unfortunately, the letter is not extant, but Moultrie's letter is. And Moultrie responded, writing that the command of the Continental troops cannot devolve upon Colonel Garden, no more than Colonel Garden can be tried by Continental articles. Moultrie was pointed out that the Continental did not fall on the command of the militia officer. It's pretty basic, but you have to and sometimes you have to say it straight. Unfortunately, you should never state straight, never stated to the right people. Moultrie's letter implied that Marion indicated in his letter to Moultrie that Colonel Garden of the Granville Militia had attempted to assume command of the Continental at Charleston. Moultrie, who just told him to just move the troops, Moultrie ignored the rank issue. He didn't say anything about it. He just directed Marion on the same day to not give up the command to Colonel Garden, but he should form a separate camp. In other words, just take your guys and just move them. And that's all we need to do, according to Moultrie. It's not like weird. See, these guys are up in Charleston and they're telling him what things he should do, and then I'm sure Marion is going, what are you talking about? What's going on here? It's not known whether Marion received Moultrie's letter before he wrote Lincoln on November 14, alerting him the situation with Garden of Marion being Marion. This is like him, for a lot of the letters that he has written. He endeavored to keep the peace. And he wrote to Lincoln, I must observe that I am not commanding officer of this ground. The command was given to Colonel Beekman, to Colonel Garden, a militia with whom I am very happy. So this is happy Marion. But shall with pleasure obey all your orders respecting the Continental troops, which I command under you. And Marion admits that he respects the orders of the militia colonel who is now over him, but he is actually over him. Just like Beekman. So, Marion had been slapped in the face twice. Once by Beekman, and now he gets another hit by Garden. And somehow he kept his cool. This is one of the reasons why I just love this guy. He can take it. He can take it. We're going to play the home trick. We'll finish that one, so move on. Now, this is the better one. This is the very, that's that hat, that was bearskin. Where did he get a bearskin hat? Charleston. Now, the entry in Marion's order book clearly indicates that Marion was at least in command of the Continental troops. The order book shows that orders by Lieutenant Colonel Marion commanding the Continental troops at Shelby, November 14, 1779. The entry, however, implies that the issue that was commanding was still alive. The issue hadn't gone away, according to Marion. From the orderly book, this is where the basis that I'm taking this. The adjutant of the 3rd Regiment will immediately read the sentence against Comrade Bessinger to him and inform him of the general's order respecting him, that he may prepare himself for the awful moment. The Assistant Quartermaster General to prepare a coffin by Wednesday at 8:00 in the morning. Bessinger was a private in the 3rd South Carolina Regiment, at this point in time, reporting to Marion, and he had been convicted of general court-martial for desertion and being in arms against his country. He was found guilty and sentenced to be hanged by the neck until death. Marion received the order to execute him in a letter from Lincoln. Lincoln ordered the execution of the Continental soldiers to be carried out on November 17th. The order was included in Marion's orderly book under orders of Militia Colonel Gardner. It appears that Marion handed the order to Gardner for inclusion in the orderly book. Curiosity to me, since Gardner was a militia officer, he was making entries in a Continental regimental order. I don't know, it just makes no sense. The entry for November 16th under Gardner's name raises the question about who is giving the order. And it said, the prisoner under sentence of death is to be executed tomorrow morning, agreeable to the sentence of the court-martial between the hours of 9 and 11 o'clock in the morning. Ironically, Bessinger had been deliberately Gardner. Basically, I guess in a sense he had been caught by Gardner's militia, and he had been a deserter in June. Now, to me, it's conjecture why Marion did not press his right of command. Perhaps he recognized the sensitive environment then pervading the camp at Charleston, for the Allies had been soundly beaten at Savannah. The South Carolina Continentals had suffered heavy losses. Morale had to be low. The remnants of the Continental had marched from Charleston to the Savannah River, laboriously crossed the river in small boats. They sieged to Savannah, suffered the ridicule of the French, only to watch their friends and fellow soldiers killed. Then they had to cross back over Savannah, at least those who could march, not back to the familiar barracks at Charleston, but instead to fields around Sheldon Church, in the middle of nowhere. No tent, no blankets, no rum. It's mid-November. It's winter on the way. And now to cap it off, a fellow soldier would hang. Perhaps Marion decided that in the midst of the execution, Bessinger would be better to let things alone. It's possible that Marion had a talk with Gardner after Bessinger's execution, for Gardner's name disappears from Marion's orderly book after November 16th. Another indication that the crisis of command was resolved is in the phrase from his orderly book, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Marion, commanding the Continental troops at Sheldon. That does not appear again in the orderly book. Marion had arrived at Sheldon November 6, but he did not protest the command structure to Lincoln until 12 days later. Once again, it's a make you scratch your head on that. Now, there seems no reason not to bring the issue to a head. Perhaps he was also justifying his actions in asserting control over his regiment in case Gardner complained to Rutledge or Lincoln. He was just going to make sure that everybody understood what was going on. Marion laid out the situation matter of fact, with an underlying tone of dissatisfaction. I have been here in a disagreeable situation occasioned by Colonel Beekman joining the militia in duty with Continental and giving the command of the whole to Colonel Gardner and the militia. All I could do was to reserve the Continental under my command as a brigade officer. I should have thought that Lieutenant Colonel Commandant of a regiment in the next and degree to a brigadier general, agreeable to resolve of Congress, was superior to a militia colonel or a junior colonel in the Continental Service. In this, I may be wrong, and shall submit to anything, I will submit to anything that is for the good of the service of my country. Surely Marion was not wrong. I don't think he very, very rarely was wrong. But he told Lincoln so in his own way. He was a well-disciplined, organized Continental officer. He knew he outranked Beekman. He knew that Gordon had no authority over his confidence. Marion was a diplomat. He kept his ego in check. He recognized the issues that had arisen between the Continental Army and Rutledge's open command of the militia. At the same time, he wasn't going to back down. Marion signed the November 8th letter, Lieutenant Colonel Commandant, 2nd Regiment. He did not sign any other letters at this time using the Commandant. He was clearly telling General Lincoln that he was the commander of Continental troops at Charleston. Marion finally separated Continentals from Gordon's militia on November 18th. I'm not going to give you another chart, I promise. I don't think, I may have. I don't. Lincoln responded a full week after reading Marion's letter. Marion writes a letter, and Lincoln responds a full week after. At least he was affirming that Marion commanded at Charleston, not Gordon. At least he said that much, anyway. Lincoln expressed his surprise that Beekman had given command of the Continentals to Gordon. Lincoln wrote to Marion, "You therefore did perfectly right in retaining the command. Colonel Gordon may question the right you have to command him if he is a senior colonel, as there is no resolve of Congress within my knowledge and this is any particular rank to a commandant." And if you look at that, it says there's no his knowledge that there's any resolve of Congress about him being a commandant of that title. Wait a minute, I thought he said a lieutenant colonel commandant. I don't understand where all that came from. I think Lincoln himself gets kind of confused about some of these things. But Lincoln did not address the issue of the rank of Colonel Beekman and Lieutenant Colonel Commandant Marion, as mentioned in Marion's previous letter. Whether Lincoln didn't understand Marion's questioning or whether General cleverly avoided my subject, I think that's what it was. Lincoln may very well have decided that since Beekman was no longer at Charleston, he could simply ignore the issue. Whatever. It's kind of time. Nothing. Whatever the case, the conflict was over. Marion returned to the business of reorganizing the 3 South Carolina regiments into one fighting force, and he must have, this is very important. Oh, wait a minute. Now we're going to, this is the good stuff. And Marion wrote to his second in command to Charleston, Isaac Charleston, in January 78. And he said, "When you see me, you will find I have a formidable pair of mustachios, which all the regiment now wear, and if you not one, you will be singular." This is a tribute to Karen McNutt. And I think this is what should be in the Marion papers. This is Marion in one of his darkest times. And now we'll see what the end, the epilogue is that Francis Marion He returned to Charleston. Of course, we know he hurt his ankle. And luckily, he didn't have to be at the fall of Charleston. So with that said, he would go on and take a major role in driving the British from the state. On the other hand, Colonel Bernard Beekman was taken prisoner at the fall of Charleston, May 12, 1780. He was a prisoner on parole to the close of the war. That's 2.5 years, something like that. Colonel Benjamin Garden was in defense of Charleston. He was also captured. But he was militia. He was paroled, and since he's a member of the militia and not the Continental Army. But you think he's lucky? Yeah, he is. He then changed his allegiance, in changing his stripes, swearing his oath to the crown. And after the peace, as a former royalist, Garden's plantation, although it's not confiscated, he was still immersed or taxed at 12%. That's what happened here, bad karma. Thank you.
We've got a couple questions, Dave.
Just something to add to that. I was listening to General Petraeus yesterday on a news outlet, and he was saying something very similar occurred to him when he was over in Iraq, and his idea, or they were planning to capture Baghdad. And he was told early on, well, when you get there, this other group will take care of handling Baghdad once we capture it. So he's on his route there, and he starts to capture these towns as he's going through, and he captures one that's pretty large, around 400,000 people. And so he goes back to his immediate commander, and he says, well, what do I do? I've got this city now. I've captured it. What do I do with it? And the guy looks at him and said, well, you know those guys that told you they'd take care of Baghdad, why don't you call them? And so what he actually ended up doing was leaving one brigade of his own people. He was with the 101st Airborne at the time. He left a brigade there to take care of that situation and moved on to Baghdad. But I say that just to show you that things often happen. And you just have to adjust in the fog of battle, whatever it is, so that you can carry on with what you need to do.
That's Francis Marion right there, making adjustments.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. It's amazing to me that you're trying to fight for the freedom of the country and you're sending these letters back and forth.
What did end up happening to Beekman when he just disappeared? Where did he go? Was he just afraid that he was going to be hanged? Or
Well, no, he was a
prisoner to Charleston, or
he was a prisoner of war.
No, before that.
Nothing would have happened. He returned to Charleston and regained his and took his regiment with him, and then he was one of the ones.
Why did he do that? Why did he do that? Was he afraid that maybe he was going to be hanged for?
I think since he thought that he was in command at Sheldon, then he could return to Charleston because Marion had returned. The whole key was the letter that Lincoln wrote to Beekman saying that after Beekman did want to move to Charleston early on, he couldn't because Marion was away. And now that Marion was back, then Beekman apparently took it on himself to take his regiment back to Charleston. Yeah, the whole thing just doesn't make sense.
JP says he wasn't afraid.
Beekman was not under any duress at all. He just walked away and went back to Charleston and resumed his command, thinking nothing had happened.
And what was Rutledge saying about all this? You know, did he not have a say in how the militia was run and what was going on? I mean, he was silent through all this.
Rutledge?
Yeah.
He didn't have a clue what was going on.
David,
Yeah.
Just the governor.
answer was fine.
When,
There
when
really
you,
weren't any really letters going back from the garden after that to anybody, I think, so. I always make the analogy, the email system wasn't really working that well then. So, as a result,
No wonder you
it
changed
didn't get to. I'm sorry, somebody.
David, when you're referring to all these people being, over here, David,
Oh, there you go. I heard you.
when you're referring to these people, Beekman and Marion and all being at Sheldon, were they at Prince William Church, or were they at William Bull's plantation, Sheldon?
Well, I had read that it was at the plantation.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, I'm ignorant about the relationship between Bull's plantation and the location of the church, so.
Because the church was burned in May of 79. So it was burned prior to all this November action.
Right, on the way up to
Yeah,
Charleston it burned.
yeah, and I don't know either where Bull's plantation is or was in relationship to where the ruins of Sheldon is today.
I'm getting ready to now I see that Richard Watkins here tonight. I'm just gonna bust him on that, go find out for me where.
But it was certainly in that area of Gardner's Corner of Beaufort County is where they were.
And tomato plant and tomato, I think that's where it was.
We'll talk about that later if we could. I'm curious.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dave.
You're very welcome.
I'm sure the town